In the previous lesson, we briefly touched on the fact that there are lots of different types of ethics that exist in terms of the study of ethics more generally. We introduced the study of ethics in the last lesson, talking about the concept of morality and what makes an action moral or immoral, or good or bad, these kinds of different things. And we did briefly touch on the fact that we can delineate the study of ethics into broad sub-philosophies, okay? So we examine that ethics can be broadly distinguished between three sub-philosophies. And we'll introduce and explain what each of these are in this lesson, and we'll talk about what the main focus of our studies is going to be in this series of lessons. So, what are the three branches of ethics? Well, the first is metaethics. This is would be described as the highest branch of ethics. If we were going to do a top-down study of ethics, which not a lot of people tend to do, generally speaking, either at university, for example, if you do a philosophy degree, you tend to do more introductory subjects of ethics before you then go into and study metaethics. I believe for me, metaethics was a second year class. The second is normative ethics, and then the third is applied ethics. Now, over the course of the next year or the next few years, as we carry on making more and more lessons for philosophy, for the Philosophy Academy, we are going to hopefully get through and study all of these in a great amount of detail to give everybody a really good understanding and a deep, broad understanding of each of these subjects of ethics. But we are going to focus on one specific one in this series of lessons, and I'll talk about that at the end. So what is the first? What is metaethics? Well, if we want to do a top-down study of ethics, we do have to start with metaethics. The word meta means outside or beyond, so from that basic logic, we're talking about outside or beyond ethics. Well, metaethics is not really a philosophical practice that is concerned with particular ethical theories, or even the application of those particular ethical theories to actual moral problems. Rather, metaethics is more of a theoretical study of ethics. It relates to ideas that are outside the practical issues of ethics. It is closely related to the study of epistemology. It is which is the study of knowledge, as you should already know, or already if you are somebody who is studying philosophy. And it's probably better to just describe the kind of questions that are asked when we think about metaethics. We think about epistemology. We think about what is knowledge. We think about what types of knowledge we can have, and how can we justify our beliefs. We've done a series of lessons on epistemology already. And so therefore, if it's closely linked to things like epistemology, we therefore have to study the epistemological questions around morality. What does it actually mean to say that something is good or something is bad? We have a general intuitive idea that, for example, murder is bad, but why is it bad? What can we do to effectively ground our moral beliefs? Is it bad because because goodness and badness is derived from some kind of error? Is it derived from some kind of naturalistic interpretation? Could we talk about things like ethical naturalism? All of these are different questions that can be asked and described and talked about within the study of metaethics. Normative ethics is very different. Normative ethics can be said to be a step down from the metaethical principles. So if we have got a very good understanding of metaethics, we then go on and talk about normative ethics from there. Normative ethics is concerned with developing what we call systems of morality that allow us to judge the morality of an action regardless of the situation. It's a good way to develop a system of what makes something right and wrong and what ways we can describe something as right and wrong, and then we can apply that to real life situations. And it doesn't matter what situation we can think of, we can have a normative framework that tells us what we ought and ought not to do, which is why it's called normative ethics. We're talking about normative statements like oughts and ought nots. Is not only, as I've just mentioned here, is not only a descriptive application of morality, describing what things are moral and why things are moral, but is also a prescriptive. It is telling us what we have to do, what we ought to do in a particular situation. It informs individuals of the normative things that they should be doing within a particular ethical problem. there are a number of different kinds of ethical theories relating to normative ethics, most of which we will study in this series of lessons. So we will talk about a broad class of normative ethical theories known as consequentialist ethics, which can be split into general consequentialist ethics, and there are some more specific types, things like utilitarianism, for example. There's also deontological ethics, most commonly associated with the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who is going to be our first study of ethics when we get past all of these introductory lessons. And then there are things like the Aristotelian idea of virtue ethics, or even situation ethics as well, that we can talk about. These are different ways in which we can apply normative frameworks to look at what ought and ought not be done in a particular moral situation. And then finally, the bottom layer of ethical study, the ground level of ethical inquiry, as you could probably describe it, is we take all of these things that we have studied in metaethics and that we have studied in normative ethics, and we apply our principles of these things that we have studied in metaethics and normative ethics, and we apply them to real-world, actual ethical situations. The most common application of ethics in applied ethics classrooms relates to the following kind of situations. So things like medical ethics, so things like the morality of things such as abortion or euthanasia or genetic modification and things like that. We can talk about things like sexual ethics, what relates to the kind of sexual conduct between individuals and what is an ethical way to engage in those kinds of acts and situations. Another very common one is business ethics. What is a good ethical system of business practices? What makes a business practices unethical? And then there's also ethics relating to war and peace. Can there ever be a just war that is a war that is just and is justified on the basis of particular situations and circumstances? So, for the most part, in this series of lessons, we'll be directing our studies to normative ethics, focusing on virtue ethics, focusing on Kantian deontological ethics, and also focusing mainly on utilitarianism. We are definitely going to do separate courses that will cover both applied ethics and metaethics in the future, but it's always generally nice to start with the normative framework of ethics before we start to talk about things like metaethics and applied ethics.